Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. This is episode 83 of our LinkedIn live stream. It's been a while, Jason, that we've been doing this now. And it's been a while that we've been unpacking the Data Protection Trends Report. For anyone that may not have seen some of the prior episodes, tell us a little bit about what this research is.
So this is what we believe to be the largest independent research project of any data protection vendor or analyst in our space. We hired a third-party research firm, Vance and Bourne, to survey nearly 3,400 organizations, most of which had more than 1,000 employees each in them, and asked them a series of different topics. By the way, as I call the topics out, you can download the report now. It's been available for almost a week at VEE. .am/DPR22. In fact, you can kind of see, I think there's a rocket ship on the cover, and let's throw that up for folks. But we covered things like the macro trends in digital transformation, IT modernization, what's driving change, what does modern backup look like, what does enterprise backup look like, where does the cloud fit in? And Dave, this week, for our fourth, while we've been doing a lot of those topics year over year, for the last part of this series, we're going to cover two new topics. We're going to cover things around cyber resiliency and preparedness, and business continuity and disaster recovery, all of which are new to our DPR coverage. Looking forward to sharing some data today.
Yeah, and speaking of sharing, I was remiss in not saying, be sure to give a shout out where you're tuning in from. We're actually tri-casting right now, meaning we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all simultaneously. We can see right now in the United States, we've got Minnesota, Colorado, Texas, and Georgia. And if we look out rest of the world, I see we've also got Romania as well. Yep. And so be sure to give a shout out where you're tuning in from. And if you have a comment or a question, be sure to update as well. We try to take those live wherever we can, but we'll come back to this global map in a little bit. Now, Jason, just as we flash the URL for the download, again, this has ostensibly nothing to do with Veeam, meaning this report is not a vendor commercial, meaning Veeam inspired. This is independent research. I like to use the phrase, Jason, you owe it to yourself if you're in the industry to go check out what is the largest ever industry-wide research and see if that actually aligns with some of the challenges you've got, if this could be used as air cover for making your case in your organization for investments or updates that you would like to tend to. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
Yeah, so one of our first data points that was new for this year is we asked organizations, how many ransomware attacks has your organization had in the last year? Now, not all attacks are successful, right? And in fact, we actually do have a stat that's published in the report. 51%, not shown here, 51% of organizations did claim that they had outages due to ransomware over the last 2 years. But this stat is actually about, the actual penetration itself, that first inflection. And what we see here, this is kind of interesting, Dave. So 24% of organizations said they had no ransomware attacks in the last year. Now, at first blush, I'd say, okay, so that means 76% did, and that in its own is scary. But Dave, you have a different lens on that 24% that's probably worth noting.
Yeah, my concern is that 24% could be artificially high. Maybe a better way to say that is this could be worse than what we even perceive this to be, meaning it's certainly possible that whoever did the response to, actually it's almost 1,900, so it's approaching 2,000 responses for this question. It's possible that members of that 24% that feel that they had no successful cyber attack in the last 12 months just may not have visibility to whether or not that attack was successful in their organization. So let's not get too confident and think that 1 out of 4 are going to be just fine, because that's really a best case scenario. And as we can see through the distribution on the curve here, the more likely scenario and the worst case scenario by far is significantly more concerning, meaning 70% suffered 2 or more ransomware attacks that were successful in the last 12 months. And if you see where we're at in that column, on average, it's right around the 3-ish, 4-ish range, and best case kind of 2. Jason, that is kind of the definition of playing, sort of gambling games versus being prepared. Because as an engineer, we like to be prepared, not leave things to chance.
Yeah, for a lot of times when we talk about cyber, it's important to remember. In fact, our friend Melissa Palmer, or VMIS33, if you follow her on Twitter, is always quick to remind folks ransomware is a disaster. Right. The difference is that when we talk about the other kinds of disasters, so we talk about fire and flood and hurricane and on all of the, and they're all very, very bad. Right. And they're typically entire site encompassing. But those happen every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe never. Right. It really is an if, not a when. And I think overall that has forced a lot or caused a lot of organizations to be overly optimistic. We can beat a fire. We're rarely in a floodplain, those kind of things. This is not an if versus a when. Ransomware is a when, not an if. And the data proves that out. And if you were one of those that were in the 24% that said that you didn't get attacked the last time, I'm just going to tell you, your time is coming, right? It's just we're in a tough situation from that perspective. Now, let's talk about what happens when that actually occurs, because so this is frequency. If we look at what happens when that comes in, think about all the different ways that ransomware does come into the fray. Right. So in this case, the organizations were asked, OK, so you had, at least one significant attack. How did it get into the environment? Now, Dave, last week while you were out, Julie Webb and I were talking about all the different things that can cause outages, not including but not limited to cyber events. And cyber was actually 51%. So we talked about that earlier. It was the most impactful 2 years in a row. The number two cause of outages that Julie and I talked about was just user stuff, right? Accidental deletion, overwrites, those kinds of things. And I'm noticing here about 42%. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, 25% of users clicked on some link, went to some website, right? Another 17% opened that wrong email, right? So you put those two together, and again, we see 42%, 2 out of 5 causes of how the outages actually successfully made their way in. We're right back to users again, Dave.
Yeah, and one of my takeaways from this, and same if you saw earlier when we listed all of the outages or causes of outages for unplanned server downtime, it's just the variety of different things here. The percentages, certainly are impactful, but look at how many different things. In this case, entree points for ransomware are successful. Cybersecurity infiltrations, you can't just do one thing. You need to do multiple things. That's why, certainly from a backup and recovery perspective, we don't say we're a security company, but we view backup as having a critical role to play in your overall ransomware attack. You need to be doing many things: perimeter security, strong passwords, multi-factor, so many things for proper digital hygiene. But let's get to the really scary point now, in my opinion, as if this wasn't scary enough already.
Yeah, if you're taking screenshots, you should probably take a screenshot of this. So when organizations were asked about their most significant attack in the last 12 months, they were also asked what percentage of their data they were able to get back. Now, let me be very clear. I'm going to put on my Veeam hat for 10 seconds. These are not Veeam customers. Right. This was an unbiased sampling of 1,300 organizations around the world. I guess there's a percentage of them that were Veeam and a percentage that are Dell and IBM and Veritas and Rubrik. And so it's a mix. Right. But the point is that when organizations were asked how much of their data they could get back, 64% was the average. Right. 64% successful recovery after they've gone through all the heroics and pulled out their tapes and unwound a snapshot, whatever else they did. They lost a third of their data, Dave.
Yeah, that's the part that I find just incredibly impactful. And this is per infiltration. So as we saw on a couple slides earlier, you could actually be under successful attack 2-3 times or more per year. Each one of those incidents, on average, you lost 36% of your data. So 64% recoverable. I always look at the boundary conditions. Yes, it's a small percentage. In this case, it's 7%, but that's approaching 1 out of 10. Actually, it's specifically, I guess, 1 out of 14. 1 out of 14 lost 80% or more of their data for every successful penetration. That is really is about a dire of a story we can describe, in my opinion. So this is why I love Melissa and you, Jason, saying things like, ransomware is a disaster. You have to be prepared. We've gone through some best practices and what we've observed in some of the prior readouts here, the Data Protection Trends Report. Automation matters. Having brittle scripts that might be years old for infrastructure configurations that are no longer representative of your environment, that is literally leaving the business to chance.
Yeah, we should talk about that, but should we check the map first really quick, see how things are going from there?
Brilliant. So,
all right, we got some
awesome
great
when we get some of the big countries. Look at Canada in the house.
Nice.
I see we've got New Jersey. We've also got New York, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois. Thank you for that. Mexico, of course, another very large country we're always happy to see. Panama, go down the way there. I see the tip of Colombia. Now, tell us about Europe, Jason.
All right, so it looks like we got some Spain in the house, got some Germany in the house, Italy. We're starting to really represent all over Europe. That's fantastic.
Yeah, Albania, Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia. I also see Ghana, Mozambique, India. If we didn't mention them earlier, apologies for that. Yep, here we've got some of the African countries. Really appreciate you tuning in.
It's been a while since we had Mozambique in the house. So welcome back to the show. Thank you for that.
And Florida just came in as well, I'm being told. So outstanding. So
nice.
Now let's hit this. Hopefully everyone is sufficiently concerned or scared. I mean, I think both words are very appropriate, but this is something when we hear the phrase, it's a matter of, when, not if. This is proving that out. This isn't vendor speak. This is almost 1,900 respondents globally saying, here's what we've experienced. And it's not from, to your point, Jason, it's not representative of one or a couple of backup vendors. This is industry-wide. Hopefully your odds are better. But what I've found, and I go back now, I'm going to show my age, but if I think about the very early 2000s, literally like 2000, 2001, that's when storage resource management tools were kind of coming into vogue. And part of the promise there was, let's go help you find unused data or data that might be redundant. So short story, maybe you could reclaim some of that expensive tier one storage capacity that you had. Inevitably, every shop, no matter where you went around the world, they said, yeah, there's probably an issue out there in the industry, but our shop, we're really good. We run things very efficiently. And hopefully everyone is running things efficiently, but everyone likes to think that they are superior than kind of global average. What this data proves is this is people self-assessing based upon successful infiltration and the knowledge that they have of it, that in a real world environment, when they had to go and recover, when they had to basically go to a DR situation, disaster recovery scenario, things did not go well.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that, again, if we think about traditional disasters, you can look at the stats, right? So if I live in Texas, right? If I lived in Houston, Texas, I couldn't get flood insurance, right? Because floods are so likely down there. You literally cannot buy flood insurance. I live in Dallas. I live in a 500-year floodplain. So I can get flood insurance, although I'm more likely to get a tornado than my friends down in Houston as well. So there's always those likely things, and you can start to figure out, okay, where would it attack? Where would it not? The thing about cyber is I just can't say enough. It's a when, not an if. Right. Yeah. And when you use the word average, right, let's bring up that stat one last time. We say 64% is the average amount of data that comes up. The word average implies for every single organization that was better, there was one that was worse, right? On that coin toss, where are you really going to be? And that's why I love the fact that we're not just putting the number up on the big screen as if that was it. And maybe there's a couple whack jobs that really did a bad job. And that's why the number got skewed. This number is not skewed. It's a good balance, right? So a third of organizations, 36%, were able to get 4 out of 5 of their servers back, 80% of their data. And that's awesome. If you're okay with, the best case scenario for a third of the environment is you only lost 20% of your data. You only It's hard to say that without kind of spitting up a little bit in the back of your throat. You only lost 20% of your data. Right. That's what people need to hear about this is that how catastrophic these events can be, regardless of what you've got going. That's why we have so many layers, proactive and reactive, and why backup is part of a holistic data protection strategy. Let's change gears though. So for the first half of our session, we talked about how bad it can be and that it will bite you, right? And we also talked about all the different ways that cyber gets in. Let's talk about all the ways that we can remediate from these kinds of crises. And again, remember that ransomware is a disaster. It is not the only disaster. So we did do some survey work as part of the DPR looking at the broad range of disasters and business continuity preparedness that are out there. One of the things I really think is interesting about this, Dave, is we asked organizations, hey, okay, there's two ways you can kind of do this. You could recover back on-prem, could be the original infrastructure, could be an alternate infrastructure. If it's underwater, maybe not the original, right? Drop ship new metal into your favorite warehouse or hospital convention center, whatever, or hotel convention center, that kind of thing. Or stand up IaaS, right? Go to DRaaS. And then also, by the way, are you gonna remount the data from the cloud? You got to pull it all back before you can start to act on it. There's a kind of a mix match of mount or run as horizontals, and then verticals are from the cloud or on-prem. And when you look at it this way, I love the fact that organizations recognize that different workloads are probably going to recover in different ways, that there's not one size fits all for how recovery is going to happen. It's a fairly even balance, and yet we see some major trends. Dave, what did you see on this particular one?
Yeah, what I like is that there's not a one size fits all to a point that I think you were alluding to, and on-prem is not going away. We've got other research that shows that. So recovery on-prem can definitely be the right answers, particularly if you've invested in that infrastructure. Increasingly, for more and more of us, recovery to the cloud for a portion of our data, or for a smaller organization, we don't have secondary site, we don't have extra equipment, we don't have hot standbys at our disposal. I think we're going to see this shift over time. What I think is really important is looking for a solution that can help accommodate both of these, because even based on the workload, it could be the same company, but different workloads may have a different kind of recovery characteristic that's best for it.
Yeah. I guess the other thing I would just take away is, look, okay, 61%, so 3 out of 5 orgs, they're going to use metal again, original or alternative. Nearly 40%, 39, right? They're going to use the cloud, either DRaaS or cloud hosted infrastructure spun up from Amazon or Azure, GCP, et cetera. I will put on my Veeam hat for 10 seconds and just point out we actually can say yes to all 4 of these scenarios, between the instant VM recovery, the ability that our S3 repositories, you can mount them on the fly, right? So if you had no secondary infrastructure, you literally could put in a credit card, stand up some new VMs, and actually just mount back to that Azure blob, back to that S3 bucket, and start pulling data back down again. Or, as our friend Anthony Spiteri likes to show off, you can mount it and start to actually run those workloads, even though you're actually still, the recovery data is still in an object store from someplace else. If you haven't checked out his blog where he does that from a Qantas flight at 40,000 feet in the air, that's pretty fantastic. Anyway, the point is you can do it from a functionality and connectivity perspective. That data is persistent, it's accessible. Go do that. All right, take the Veeam hat back off again. This is how folks are planning on doing it. The one thing I worry for is the who. The what's easy, right? There's 4 different ways to do it. Veeam will let you do all 4 of them. Some of the other players will do at least 2 or 3 of them. But the who is a little bit concerning. So this last question, we looked at some of the complexities involved in actually standing workloads up, right? Now, Dave, we got 3 options here. One of them is disappointingly small, and the other 2 are, I think the technical term is freaking scary. You want to unpack that for us, my friend?
Yeah, I'll let you save with, is probably the optimal answer. The concerning ones are just going clockwise. That notion at 29% saying they're going to manually configure things during a crisis. And what that really means is go look for media, go pull down ISO images. Maybe they've got to get the network back up to go figure out what website to pull down an image from. Oh, that may require credentials. These before you even get to a complete service, meaning, your web middleware, your actual application, your operating system, et cetera, you've had to do half a dozen possible things. And that's for one business process or server potentially. Trying to do all of that basically while your boss's boss is standing over your shoulder, wondering when are we going to be back up? And having to explain, wait a minute, can you read this, 16-digit license key to me while I type this in? That's a very concerning strategy. Not much better is if you go down around, 6 o'clock there, we're going to have predefined scripts. And we're going to run those remotely. I guess go back to, we've all written scripts in various kinds throughout our days. The big problem is configuration drift. How accurate are those scripts? Are we even the person that actually tweaked those scripts, wrote those scripts in the first place? And in a real disaster, how successful is that going to be? So that leads us to, quote unquote, the ideal answer, Jason.
Yeah, the ideal answer is workflows and scripts, right? I mean, workflows and orchestration. The ideal answer is that what you need to be planning for is you figure out all the minutia and the recipe as the workload looks today, and you create orchestrated workflow that'll actually, it'll rehome the server, it'll remount the storage, it'll test for a heartbeat, it'll update DNS, it'll do everything it has to do in an orchestrated workflow. And the reason that's so important is because if you build that workflow in advance, not only will that workflow run the day that the disaster happens, that workflow will also happen every month when you test it, right? But I can't emphasize enough how flawed these other two things are. And let me kind of channel back a little bit. So I've been in the data protection space for 31 years. Of 9 of those years, I was a certified business continuity disaster recovery planner. And one of the very first lessons they taught us is you should plan that the SMEs that are responsible for day-to-day operations will not be available during the recovery exercise.
Yep.
Right. I had customers during 9/11, and their primary data center was in Tower 1, and their secondary data center was in Tower 2. Right. I had customers on during Hurricane Sandy. I've had customers and clients during the Northeast power outages. I mean, these kinds of crises happen. But even when you get rid of the really big ones and you think about the everyday disasters, right? I was a IBM BCRS guy for a while, and one of the things that they would talk about is if you have a flood, I'm going to pick on Houston again, right? If the data center is underwater, that's a regional type of crisis. Same thing for hurricanes and fires. Chances are the IT team are bailing water out of their living rooms at home, right? Not driving into the data center to try to figure out how to stand up those machines that are still dripping wet. Right. And so you should not presume those original staff, for all the reasons I just showed you, all the reasons, those staff aren't going to be there. Right. What you need is to put their intelligence and their expertise into workflow. Right. That's where you encapsulate all of that, and it tests every month. And every month when everything is working, they can adapt those scripts and those workflows and get it right so that when you need it most, all you need to do is hit an easy button. So cannot emphasize enough how important that is. Sorry, I soapbox a little when it comes to BCDR.
No, very well said. And, speaking of all kinds of different things that can happen in different geographies, understand from the world map, we've got a couple new geographies or locations that came in, specifically Jamaica and Pakistan, in addition to what we saw prior. So super huge thanks for all of that. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. And Jason's worth pointing out, we actually have 4 to 5 times the number of people in a given week that will watch the replay of this after we post it up live as well. So speaking of live, we've got a couple of things upcoming. This Friday, we've got our good friend Rick Vanover. Rick is going to be on the Friday Tech Bites, hosting actually a Veeam customer from Heitman Steel, Ken Miller, going to be showcasing Veeam job scheduling across on-prem, Microsoft 365, Azure, and service providers as well. On Monday, we'll have another Veeam customer. This next one will be from Staples Solutions. But let's give a couple shout outs on research and trends ahead. Jason, why don't you give us, since I feel like DPR, Data Protection Trends Report, is your baby, let's have you give the shout out on it.
Yeah, we've done this 4-part series. There's also 4-part blogs that are popping out about the same time on some of these same topics. But we would just encourage you. There's a lot of areas that we didn't cover in the series yet. So 67% of organizations use cloud as part of their data protection strategy, either as a repository, right? We talked about that earlier, as an S3 or Azure bucket, or as a backup as a service, DR as a service kind of scenario. We've got stats on real world around data loss and downtime. Dave, you mentioned at the beginning of the session, please download the report. Go and talk to your people, right? How much downtime could you actually have? How much data could you afford to lose? And then also, what I think one of the most interesting questions, and you actually see this in Dave in our blog on what does enterprise backup mean? You can cheat and download the report. It's actually, I think, slide 2 or slide 3 in the report. Or our blog comes out a week from tomorrow on Tuesday on that particular topic. But just looking at the diversity of workloads, heterogeneity, those kinds of things, go check that out. Go download the report. And then if you have questions, you can email us at strategicresearch@veeam.com. That reaches both of us. Or find us on Twitter. I'm Jay Buff. Dave is Backup Dave, right? So download those. And then speaking of engagement, Dave, we have another type of engagement coming up. I actually see the poster behind you on your wall. Here's the version that doesn't have your head in the way. Want to walk us through it? There you go.
Yeah, we are actually going to have a hybrid event. So by definition, that means we're going to be back in person for those that are interested and, of course, able to attend live. We'll be back in Las Vegas, May 16th through 19th. You can see some of the key topics we're going to be riffing on through multi-day sessions. Also want to point out, speaking of that virtual nature, it will continue to be a no-cost, that's code for free, event for those attending virtually. So VeeamON 2022 back in person, but also want to be able to offer that to rest of world for those that may not be able to travel or otherwise have commitments where they're not able to get on an airplane, take time away from the office, etc. So very happy to be having that come back up. I'm being told we've got some more map update, specifically Louisiana, Atlanta, from the United States, Nigeria, Kenya, Malaysia. So actually a pretty strong, Jason, showing from Africa today. Super shout out to them. Looks good.
Yeah, love that. No, although I got to admit, I'm a little disappointed my friends from South Africa did not chime in. We're going to have to pile on and find out where they were this morning. Kind of take them for granted. But for everyone else on the in Africa, thank you for joining for today. And we know it's an odd hour for you. So.
Absolutely. So thanks so much. Thanks for visiting with us as we continue to unpack now the Data Protection Trends Report. We'll switch to some other topics going forward. We have a lot of great research. I won't spoil it, but we've got more research that's specific to other topics that we're going to share with you in the upcoming months. Until then, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Bye for now.